Let's talk about the 5e Dungeon Master Crisis, as it has been coined. Now, some other fine channels such as Questing Beast and Dungeoncraft did videos on this back in December, so I figured, hey, I have opinions, maybe I should offer my 2 cents on the matter. Now, I agree with a lot of what has already been offered on the topic, and I won't rehash all of that today. Instead, I'm going to deep dive into 2 things that I see as contributing to the DM crisis, which, by the way, simply means that there are fewer and fewer folk willing to be DMs these days. And when you have lots of players and no dungeon masters, well, that means no one plays D&D and you rather have a problem. So when I ask myself why someone might not want to be a dungeon master, my first thought is that being a dungeon master is intimidating for those who've never done it before. And following that is that being a DM is difficult, complicated, and involves doing a lot of things that a person probably doesn't know how to do. Now, this is all very obvious and not one of my main points. It merely serves as a springboard to dig a little deeper as we ask ourselves what specific factors or issues contribute to this big picture problem. These are our root causes, the things that if remedied could help reverse the declining desire to be a dungeon master. Or if it's not declining, it's at least a low desire to be a dungeon master. Right, I don't know, I don't have those numbers. The first root cause that I want to address is overpowered and or broken characters, spells, and other features. I think this is a big problem that D&D has, and I've griped about it in the past, but today I'm going to tell you why it's such a problem. At the core, having OP and or broken character mechanics, depending on how you see them, makes it more difficult to be a dungeon master. From adjudicating rules to designing fun, satisfying adventures for players, many elements get more complex when there isn't a baseline for challenge and difficulty. You see, as a DM myself, I know what it feels like when you design an adventure that is supposed to be challenging only to have the characters obliterated. On the other hand, I also know what it feels like to design an adventure that is not supposed to be that deadly, only to find the characters dropping one after another and a TPK looming on the horizon. Furthermore, as a player, I know how much more satisfying it is to have a tough battle but win, and how disappointing it can be to cakewalk a villain who had been built up over the course of a campaign to be super powerful. Now, I know there are lots of people who don't think this is a problem, but there are many more who do. And I have heard from countless dungeon masters and seen comment after comment on my channel from DMs saying that balancing encounters and adventures is one of their top frustrations. So, whether you personally think that balance should or should not be a thing in D&D is irrelevant. If we had the ability to balance things, then those that wish to do so could. And those who wish to ignore balance could also do so. But as it stands, one camp is getting screwed. So whose fault is all of this? Well, the natural response is that it's Wizards of the Coast's fault. Their new business model, which is probably a directive they received from the cold, heartless suits at Hasbro, is to increase revenue. It's understandable. They are a publicly traded company with shareholders, and one of the primary objectives of such companies and the C-suite who run them is to increase shareholder value, which means to increase stock price, which means to increase revenue, which means to sell more stuff. And something that WotC has learned is that power sells. On the Magic the Gathering side of things, I have heard that they know that slightly more powerful cards encourage folks to buy card packs. And on the D&D side of things, they know that churning out books with progressively more powerful character options, classes, subclasses, spells, etc., also encourages players to buy those books. This power creep, you see, is intentional. It is a sales tactic. It is a way to encourage you to buy their products, and it works. They are reaping millions of dollars a year with that strategy. In 2021, it was over $1 billion. I mean, numbers don't lie. So what am I trying to say? Am I just criticizing Wizards of the Coast product development and how they design their games because it's easy to do so or something? No. What I'm trying to say here is that Wizards of the Coast is moving in a direction that comes at the expense of Dungeon Masters. They are not doing Dungeon Masters a service with this strategy, and over the long term, they're decreasing the relative amount of DMs in the game, and if we get to a point where we don't have a critical mass of Dungeon Masters, the whole game is going to tank. And honestly, I suspect that many of the people at Wizards of the Coast already know this. I don't think they're stupid. What I do think is that they are at the whim of the C-suite, the executives at Wizards of the Coast, and more so those at Hasbro, who in turn have to answer to board members who represent shareholders. This is just the way corporations work. I imagine that there are lots of wonderful people at WotC who would love to take the game in a different direction, but their hands are tied. But all of that considered, is it any wonder folks don't want to be dungeon masters? And what's more, most players have been in games where the DM has been faced with another player who brought something horribly OP to the table. And then everyone there watched as the dungeon master struggled, as the DM tried to explain why X thing wasn't allowed, and then observed as the player argued with the DM, sometimes aggressively, to get their way. And when players observe this happening, do you think the first thought that comes to their mind is, gee, I think it would be fun to be a dungeon master? No, I don't think that's what comes to their mind. They probably are like, wow, I'm glad I don't have to deal with that guy arguing about that stuff. Sucks to be the DM. And while we're at it, let's just address players who do these things to their game tables. Not just to their dungeon master, but to the entire game table, everyone that is there playing the game. The players who bring these absurdly broken combos to their tables, are they doing a service to their dungeon masters? Are they making their life easier or harder? For that matter, are they doing a service to their fellow players, making the game better for them? Are they doing a service for the hobby? Or are they just being a bit selfish in their desire to watch the world burn? I don't know. I can't read their minds or know their motivations, but one must wonder. I personally have been in games with players just like that, so I know that they exist, they are out there, and they're really just there, from my point of view, to instigate and cause problems. That might not be what they think. They probably have different reasons and motivations, but when it comes down to it, that's what you see, and they appear to enjoy it. I believe that they are in the minority. I've not seen a whole lot of them, but I know they exist. Now, I know deep in the core of my soul that there are already lots of folks down in the comments saying something to the effect of, the Dungeon Master has all the tools they need to deal with powerful characters. But don't stop writing that comment, please keep going. And while you're at it, answer these questions in your comment. First, what exactly are those tools? And if you say adjusting the challenge of the monsters and encounters and adventures, I have a follow-up question for you. What tools does the DM have to adjust the challenge of those things? And by the way, the following are invalid answers. The challenge rating system, which we all know doesn't work, and the adventuring day mechanic, yes, that's also broken. And furthermore, both of those systems get more and more broken with every new, slightly more powerful character option that Wizards of the Coast releases, or with every new ridiculous combination that Reddit posters or somebody else shares with everybody. So what tool are we left with? Experience, right? Yes, experience. For instance, I've been a dungeon master for 20 years, so to me, it's not a big deal to adjust the challenge of monsters and adventures. But if experience is all we have left, I have another question for you to answer in your comment. What does a brand new dungeon master do when they don't have that experience? Flounder around for 20 years? Or maybe it doesn't take that long. Maybe it's just 2 years of extreme frustration. Do you think they're going to last that long? Or do you think that they might just give up and find a different game system that's easier to play and run? Or perhaps, understanding the uphill battle they probably have before them, a person considering becoming a dungeon master decides to just not bother to begin with. You see, I'm concerned far less with the veteran dungeon masters, as they probably know how to handle this issue. My concern is more for the new game master coming to D&D, because you see, this is what happens when folks who think they want to be DMs are turned off by the complexity of it all. They don't become dungeon masters. They don't even give it a try. And then the veteran dungeon masters are either retiring from the hobby or moving on to other game systems. Where does that leave D&D? Lots of players and no dungeon masters. And we already find ourselves there to a certain extent, and I feel like it's only going to get worse if things don't change. Now, if you agree with me on this, please give me a thumbs up, and if you disagree, give me a thumbs down. Also, if you think that power creep is beneficial for dungeon masters somehow, please let us know why down in the comments. Am I missing something? And if you think there is no power creep, well, then you know where to scream at me. However, you know what would be refreshing? an actual mathematical analysis that proves there is no power creep. I would love to see that, and I know some of you nerds out there could do that. I call you nerds, but I'm a nerd too. We're all nerds here. Like, if you're watching this, okay, yes, we accept that. We're little nerds, okay? But it's cool. We love it because this game is amazing. Now, the second root cause of the DM crisis I would like to address is the lack of Dungeon Master support. Here's the thing. Dealing with character power creep is just one thing that Dungeon Masters need to do to run the game. And frankly, it's a pretty small slice of that pie at that. There is a whole lot more that DMs need to do. Design the campaign setting, the world the game takes place in, or read about and learn a pre-made campaign setting, design the adventures, or buy and read pre-made adventures. And both of those big things the DM does outside of the game session time. And then during the game, the DM is obviously running the game, which involves deciding what their NPCs say and do, adjudicating rules, deciding how NPCs in the world reacts to character actions, handling player issues that come up, etc., etc. A Dungeon Master has a lot on their plate, and frankly, that doesn't really change depending on the system. I don't care if you're running OSR, Call of Cthulhu, Shadowrunner, or whatnot. In most RPGs, the roles of a GM are mostly the same. Sure, they differ from RPG to RPG. Sure, some RPGs make a GM's job easier, but the basic rules I just mentioned are still things the GM does. But not to worry, because the Dungeon Master's Guide contains everything a Dungeon Master needs to know to be a DM, right? Well, no, wrong. I mean, not only does the DMG lack much of the information a DM actually needs to know, but what it does include is often very basic and high level. It might give you an inkling, but it lacks the common sense practical information that I think DMs really need. Furthermore, as WotC pumps out more powerful character options, they're failing to update parts of the underlying game system that support Dungeon Master's ability to maintain balance in their games, namely the challenge rating and adventuring day mechanics. Players seem to be getting all the love, but Dungeon Masters are forgotten about, which seems really odd, since WotC itself recognizes that GMs buy like 80% of the products they make. So, if a DM can't find what they need in the core books, where do they look? Well, thankfully, there are resources out there. There are websites out there, such as The Alexandrian, and books such as Arbiter of Worlds by Alexander Macris, and YouTube channels such as mine, and many others that dedicate themselves almost exclusively to helping game masters. And all of that is wonderful. But there are millions of people who play D&D, and some unknown number, likely in the tens of thousands, of Dungeon Masters. And if I had to venture a guess, I would say that the vast majority of them only ever get the core rulebooks. They either don't know about the other resources, such as all the free ones that are out there, or they don't have the funds to purchase them in the case of paid ones. However, one might ask the question, shouldn't a Dungeon Master only need to get the core rulebooks? Shouldn't the core books, especially the DMG, contain everything, or at least almost everything, a DM needs to know? But here's the thing, if it did, then almost all DMs would have the tools, the information at least, they need to run the game and wear all the hats that a DM wears. However, as is, a Dungeon Master must look elsewhere if they want to learn anything more than just the bare basics. Now this, of course, is a double-edged sword from my point of view, because if the DMG contained almost everything, well, frankly, it probably would put me and others out of business. I also might add that the Dungeon Master Guide would probably be ginormous, an incredibly thick book that probably no one would read or get through. So maybe this point is a wash. Maybe it is beneficial that it doesn't contain everything, because it's kind of a mutually beneficial relationship, right? Like, WotC doesn't necessarily do what they arguably should do, but that allows folks like me to come in and fill that need. Now, if you're a Dungeon Master and you'd like to support the work my team and I do on this channel and through our various publications to help you and other Dungeon Masters get the information and tools you need, consider becoming a DM Lair patron. Your patronage not only helps us continue making the informational videos and all of the free DM resources over on the DMLair.com, but as a DM Lair patron, you'll also be getting an issue of Lair Magazine every month. Lair Magazine contains gobs of 5th edition resources to help you reduce your prep time and still run amazing games. For instance, 5e adventures, digital maps, puzzles, traps, monsters, magic items, and even articles that explain things like how to turn a normal monster's stat block into a legendary monster stat block. My team's goal is to give our patrons the very best resources we can to help them run their games. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, check out that link down below to the DM Lair Patreon. And if not, that's cool. Please continue to avail yourself of all of the other resources we create, such as this video right here that teaches you how to create legendary boss monsters from normal stat blocks. And until next time, yeah, I'm done.